Hey everybody, Nick and Oscar here. Today's video is one I've been really excited to share for a long time. This is going to be about how I made the soundtrack for my feature film, The Game of Life. This is going to cover both the original music I composed and produced for the movie, but also a couple of existing songs which I licensed from amazing artists whose music I've listened to for years. So, although I often talk about the visual side of filmmaking, the audible is an undeniably important part of the formula. Some people argue that sound is more important than picture. So today, we're going to talk about how my film got its music. And I'm going to divide this into three sections. First, the overall planning and thought process behind the score. Second, the actual composition and production of the soundtrack cues themselves. And third, the licensing of those existing songs for use inside the film. If you're new here, the basics are that I'm an independent filmmaker and I recently finished my first movie. I wrote, directed, and starred in it, and I've talked about a lot of aspects of the process here on the channel. The whole project took about 2.5 years from start to finish, and as with most movies, finalizing the soundtrack was one of the last steps in the process. The reason for this is that in order to get the rhythms and the structure of a film score to work alongside the visuals, those visuals usually need to have their timing pretty well locked in. For this film, I knew I'd be doing the bulk of the soundtrack myself. And fortunately, the world of music production has become so accessible in the past few decades, even more so, I think, than the world of filmmaking has. Just about anyone can produce outstanding music with nothing more than a laptop and a little bit of imagination. I've been an amateur musician for most of my life, and I was really into music production as a teenager, so it's something I was comfortable with. For this film, I decided that all the central themes would be played on the piano. It really speaks to the theme of the film about this solitary, lonely guy. He's very bright on his own, he's capable of extraordinary things, but he has a hard time connecting with others. A piano solo can be exactly that way. Beautiful, complex, extraordinary, and yet still stand alone. The piano also happens to be the instrument that I'm most comfortable with, and my movie takes some inspiration from the 1992 Robert Redford thriller Sneakers, which also featured a piano-based score, so it felt like an appropriate homage. Also, I love the idea of repeating motifs in a soundtrack for their ability to instantly bring the audience to a specific place. If you've heard a particular theme before in the film, it can act as an emotional cue, or it can tell you what might be around the corner. It can also help travel with a particular character or arc and evolve consistent with the story. So as your character goes from mild-mannered Peter Parker to the brave and heroic Spider-Man, his musical theme might go from timid to bold, but still use the same chords and structures. That's something I knew I wanted for this film, and we're going to get into how I implemented it. So we've got our core idea, piano-based score, repeating motifs, and before we get to the music itself, I want to show you how I set things up here on the workstation. If you've seen some of my other videos, you might have seen this desk area before, but one thing you will not have seen is a little surprise that's hiding under the desk. This is my little 88-key controller. It's just a MIDI controller full of fully weighted piano keys. This was part of a larger controller that I've had for many years, and a while ago I took it apart completely, removed the whole metal casing and moved around the electronics, and built them into this wooden enclosure that I built specifically for this to minimize the footprint, making it as small as possible so that it could be easily tucked under the desk with a little shelf and some drawer hardware that I bought. So now this is kind of how I control everything in the music world. And my software is a DAW called Ableton Live, but what I'm going to show you works for every kind of digital audio workstation out there. And we knew that our central theme was going to be piano-based, right? So I'll usually set up a couple of pianos. One of them will be kind of bright and cheery, like that. Some of them might be a little bit more ethereal. You know, something like that. So I set things up a couple of different ways there with different pianos, and then I usually have at least 3 string voicings. I'll have one of them at least set to a staccato. Something like that, you know. Usually at least one of them will be tremolo. Tremolo strings are kind of like a cinematic cheat code. They're just so great for so many different kinds of emotions. They can help lengthen a moment. They can feel romantic. They can feel scary. they can do a whole lot of legwork for you. So always have some tremolo strings going on, or legato voicing will be longer, smoother notes that are connected. So that's a legato voicing. Just with those few things that I've shown you, you can really start to sort of play tennis between the parts. So this is a piece that I wrote for one of the hospital scenes, and it's something like this. So you can kind of hear there the staccato voices, the get taken over by tremolo voices. So it's like dun dun. Just a little bit, kind of. And then we do a little passing back and forth with the piano voices. So this cue is for part of the movie where things change from kind of a quirky feeling to kind of a somber feeling. And so I had to find exactly where that change needed to happen. And so right here, the music goes from that kind of like funky little strings and piano piece to just the piano solo. So Jack has sort of gotten some bad news and he's not feeling so great. And so that's just kind of the magic that soundtrack can do for you. Part 2, making the music. As I mentioned earlier, I love the idea of repeating motifs, and I wanted one of those to be central to the main character, Jack, and his journey. And I thought that what would be really appropriate for this film was the idea of a tritone. A tritone is a chord spacing that sounds something like this. So that's kind of a weird gap between notes, right? It's not the usual, major triad. That's a major chord. It's not a minor chord. It's not a fourth, like Here Comes the Bride, or a fifth, which is a very, kind of hopeful but somewhat open thing, or a sixth, or a seventh, or an eighth. It's this weird space that's not a normal interval in any major or minor scales. And so it was sometimes called the devil's chord for that reason. So I wrote a theme for Jack that sandwiches the tritone in between an open fifth and a minor third. And I just kept the root note repeating, so it sounds something like this. Okay, so that's kind of the theme. It's very sort of hollow and open and a little bit sad, kind of like Jack himself. But the theme evolves throughout the movie, just as Jack goes through his story, sort of opening up to others, realizing the benefits as well as the pitfalls that opening up to people can have. And those chords, which start very open and hollow, change. So the tritone becomes a D major seventh. The minor third, which was an A minor third, becomes an F major seventh. And then the final chord becomes an F minor over G. And so that's kind of like, we went from three, sort of very hollow and sad chords, the open fifth, the tritone, the minor third, to three major chords, which are C major, D major seventh, and F major seventh. So much happier, right? But then the structure ends an F minor over G, which is, slightly unresolved. Just like Jack's story, he kind of learns, it's okay to not be okay. He makes some progress, but he's not perfect. And so I use that theme in different ways throughout the movie. And then so by the end of the movie, it has fully opened up. It's much happier. The end credits are meant to, make you feel good walking out of the theater or wherever you see the movie. And so that thing that was kind of like, has now, evolved to like, so it sounds something like. So it obviously sounds much, much happier, right? But it's just those same chords, just sort of voiced differently. And I'll show you that because during the closing credits, it goes from that happy version of the theme to the sort of sadder original version, just as a kind of like coming full circle thing, or to just sort of remind the audience that that's the arc we've come from. So here's how that song sort of ends. Yeah, and so this is another opportunity to show you the tremolo, which I think we also have in this project file somewhere. Tremolo strings, I'm telling you, cinematic cheat code right there. So that's generally how I wrote and composed some of the themes. For, it starts with the piano and the strings, but then depending on what kind of thing we're doing, I'll add something else. So, for example, this one has the kind of like a little bell sound. That's a synthesizer that I just made in a program called Serum. Just to kind of add some little sparkle and fun. So whatever we need, if it's bass or synthesizers or whatever else it is. I'm not sure what I have in here. Snare, hats, we have some bass in here. Yeah, it's another synthesizer bass. Cool. And for mastering, I keep things pretty simple. My mastering chain is usually something like an equalizer, an exciter like this OTT. So this is like a multi-band compressor. And then just a little bit of limiting. So this one, this limiter is adding 1 decibel of gain, but just making sure that the levels don't peak. And then I just try to preserve as much dynamic range as possible so that when I go back into the video editing software and I'm mixing it with dialogue and Foley and stuff, I've got room. If I need to squash it down further, I will there. But okay, so that was the composition of the main theme and sort of its evolution throughout the film. In addition to that, I had a few other key themes that I really wanted to stand out, and one of them was what I called the Jenny theme. It represents not just the character of Jenny, but also how Jack sees her throughout the film, especially when things seem to be going well between them. So I wanted something that felt, giddy and romantic, a bit like running through a field of flowers kind of thing. Again, it's very, very simple here, just 2 chords. It was, a C major 7th inverted and an F major 7th inverted. And it was kind of like... like that. So once it had, some stuff with it and backgrounds and whatever, it's something like this. Okay, fun, right? So it's very simple, but very breezy. It gets the job done. And what's interesting is that two of those chords, the C major 7th and the F major 7th, those are also represented in the main theme for Jack, which has, you know, the C, it starts as an open 5th, but eventually becomes C major, and then F major. It's an F major 7th for him as well. So at the very, very end of the film, those themes kind of intersect in a sort of synthesis as Jack is sort of putting together ideas of his own life and Jenny's life. And that one sounds like... weird, right? I thought it was fun. I thought it played well in context of the film. Sometimes, you know, soundtracks sound a bit odd on their own because they're meant to be viewed with a picture. And so usually soundtracks that you get like on an album have been rearranged or recomposed so that they sound better being listened to by themselves. But let me know what you guys think about this. Is this something you want to see more of? Right now, there's nowhere to listen to the soundtrack all by itself, but I could probably put something like that together if any of you wanted to. What do you think? Would you pay $5 to download this album if it were available somewhere? Let me know in the comments. The film's third major theme revolves around the skeleton key. It's the principal MacGuffin in the story. It's kind of like this Aladdin's lamp thing that allows the characters to do anything they want. And so I wanted it to kind of sound a little bit mysterious. Again, I kept things really simple. It was kind of like a... just kind of that sort of thing. And it was nice because just a little hint of this theme could kind of tell you what you were talking about. This theme actually appears in the film much earlier than the object itself does. There's, you know, sort of the wise old mentor figure talking to Jack about the possibilities of defeating SSL encryption and what Jack's trying to do. And we hear just a little piece of this theme, even though the object itself isn't going to show up for about 20 minutes. So it was cool to do stuff like that, to kind of just like plant little hints in the soundtrack to go along with the ideas I had for the story. Anyway, that's the wider view of how I put these cuts together. If you want to see anything more specific about any of this, just let me know in the comments. Now, we're going to talk about the completely murky, mysterious, exhilarating world of musical licensing. Getting an existing song you know and love and securing permission to use it in your movie. For the most part, my film contains original music. I made it, I have the rights to it, and I can do whatever I want with it. But it does feature 2 songs by artists I love, whose publishers were willing to talk to me and negotiate the rights for playback. The first is a song called Transient by an artist named Haywyre, and the other is Park Your Car on My Face by the incredible Lewis Cole. These are both songs I had already known and loved before shooting the movie. I have no connection to the artists whatsoever, I just love their work. So how on earth did I get permission to use their music in the movie? This is a fascinating topic to me, and one of the reasons I love it so much is because it's one of those things that's kind of like a dark art. There are people who negotiate these kinds of rights for a living. They've accumulated all this knowledge and personal connections and expertise, but it's all in their heads. There are no public repositories of information for this kind of thing, really. And I had some idea about that going into the movie. As I wrote the film, I created a list of songs that I would just love to put into the movie if I could get the rights. And when the film was written and I was looking at that list, I knew that 90% of the songs would be impossible to get just because the artists were these huge multi-platinum folks who would routinely sell out stadiums, and our budget just wouldn't be in the same country, let alone the same neighborhood as what they were used to for licensing. So not gonna happen without some kind of personal connection or something. So I looked at the remaining few songs on my list and I just started researching, finding the name of the publisher, finding their website, finding an email address, sending emails. Sometimes it takes a while. Some folks work with really big publishers, and those publishers may have systems for how to contact them if you don't have your own agent or you don't already know how to license music for them. Sometimes publishers are small and independent, and you can actually find an email address. Some websites aren't current. Some email addresses bounce. You know, there are lots of wrong turns and dead ends, and there's no one way that this stuff works. And I knew that my emails wouldn't be top priority for anyone who was receiving them, because I was a micro-budget film asking to license a song for very little money. And usually, those kinds of licenses, if you get a reply, will come back with a yes but. It'll be, yes, you can use this song, but only for 10 times the fee you offered. Or, yes, you can use the song and at the fee you offered, but only for 1 year and only for festivals. That kind of negotiation, yes, but, is true even if you try to use a song you found on a service like Artlist or Audio, and I know because I've asked. These folks really do not want to give you a perpetual license, just in case your movie becomes a hit. They want to reserve the right to get a little bit more money if suddenly the pie is a lot larger. But I had the advantage of being very organized and very clear in my request. For me, the most important aspect of licensing was to maintain a very clean legal structure. I financed the entire movie myself. I'm the sole rights holder for just about every aspect of the film, from the words on the screenplay, to the design of the title card, to the score I recorded, like everything. I wrote all the contracts for the cast and crew to make sure those rights stayed very clean and tidy. So for those edge case negotiations where a publisher was on the fence about whether to accept my very low budget offer for a very broad license, I had a really good negotiating line, which was to tell them, listen, I've been working on this film for years. It's a huge personal investment of my time and money, so the last thing I want is to be unable to distribute the film because of a dangling rights issue on one song. Like, that's a powerful statement. If we're saying, like, this whole film is mine, I can't let you suddenly have control of its distribution just because of the rights to one song. It's a powerful statement, and it was completely true. For some publishers, my budget was just too low. But as I mentioned, we did license 2 songs for the film. The first is Transient by Haywyre. He's a solo artist who usually produces electronic music. It's very, straight down the middle electronic. But this particular track is a melancholy piano solo, and it plays near the beginning of the film at Jack's lowest moment. We hear most of the song, but a small section in the middle was cut out just for timing reasons in terms of pacing of the action. But we do hear the very beginning and the very end of the track. And as the final note of the song, Transient, plays, the film's title card comes up, along with a soundtrack cue I wrote for the title card, composed specifically in F minor to go along with Transient, which is in that same key. The other song I licensed is Park Your Car on My Face by Lewis Cole. It still astonishes me that we got this song. Lewis Cole is an unbelievably talented guy. If you haven't seen anything of his, I highly recommend starting with the YouTube video for Doing the Things. I'll leave a link below. I knew from very early on that I wanted this particular song, Park Your Car on My Face, for a particular moment in the film. I had specific visual ideas that I wanted to coordinate to the song. So this is just the opposite of the usual process of writing music to fit the picture. It took me a couple months just to find the right contact information for the publisher, and many more months to get everything licensed. And this one was more difficult than with the Haywyre track, because to license a song, you need 2 sets of rights. One is the right to play the master recording. These are called the master rights. Then you need another permission called a sync right, the right to synchronize the music alongside with your chosen visual images. So the master rights and the sync rights. For the Haywyre track, both of those rights were held by the same entity. For the Lewis Cole track, 2 separate and unrelated entities held the rights. One held the master and one held the sync. So I had these email chains with like a dozen different people on them going over months and months, finally to sort everything out. But it did get sorted out and was completely 100% worth the trouble in the end. I was just delighted to have this song for this moment. Of course, there were other cases when I went through a similar journey, negotiations, months and months of back and forth, and did not come away with a license. There was one negotiation in particular where I thought we were really close, but then the other party just ghosted me. I still love the music, and I don't think their publisher even presented my offer, which is a real drag. I had this thing of like, I know it's a small budget project, but it's super personally meaningful, and I think it could really blossom into something cool in the festival circuit. Maybe do you want to take a flyer on the little guy? The Haywyre and Lewis Cole publishers obviously bought into that idea with me, and I'm tremendously grateful to both of them for that. Again, links to both of those artists are in the description. I'm going to link a couple tracks by each one of them so you can get an idea both what's in the film and what the artists do more generally. But what do you think? As I look back on this part of the film, I'd say it's definitely one of the aspects I'm most proud of. And from the limited number of people who have seen the film so far, I'd say one of the more common bits of feedback is being impressed by the score. People tended to like how it felt to hear these cuts in the context of the movie. And that's really the best possible thing I could hope to hear. Right now, I don't have the soundtrack published anywhere, but I could look into doing that if any of you are interested. What do you think? Would you pay a few dollars to download it if I set that up somewhere? Let me know in the comments. That's going to be all for now. Again, let me know if there's anything specific that you'd like to know more about related to this process. It's one of the more interesting and exciting aspects of filmmaking, but one that I don't think gets a lot of play, at least in the general filmmaking space on YouTube. So I hope this video was helpful and informative. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.